In the winter of 1899, at nearly 11,000 feet on a Colorado pass, the last families in a dying gold town did something desperate. They were snowed in and running out of food. So they tore the wooden siding off their own houses, cut it into 75 pairs of skis, and pointed themselves downhill toward Aspen. They left the town to the snow and never came back. That town sits in the Rocky Mountains, and it is far from the strangest thing we found up there. That place makes this list. So do 12 others. A silver camp on a ridge so exposed the wind did the demolition looters usually do. A ghost town that wakes up every summer when scientists move into its century-old cabins. A valley with more UFO reports than Roswell, and the skeleton of a horse to prove where the legend started. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a nearly intact town the government sealed off in the 1980s and made it illegal to enter. If you like careful trips into the places history left behind, subscribe. Today, we are counting down 13 places in the Rocky Mountains locals would rather not talk about. We start in the Front Range foothills west of Boulder in a mountain town of about 1,500 called Nederland. It is a living town, not a ghost town. But for 30 years, it kept a dead man in a shed, and then it threw a party about him. Bredo Morstill died in Norway in 1989. His grandson, a cryonics believer, had the body packed in dry ice and shipped to the United States, then moved to a backyard tough shed in Nederland in 1993, hoping science might one day bring him back. When the grandson was deported for overstaying his visa, and the setup went public, the town's first instinct was to ban it. So it wrote a rule forbidding human remains on private property, then added a grandfather clause so its one existing frozen corpse could legally stay. Caretakers hauled about 3/4 of a ton of dry ice up from Denver twice a month for decades. From 2002 to 2023, the town ran a festival around him, coffin races, a hearse parade, a polar plunge, before the body finally moved to Estes Park. A town that tried to ban the dead guy ended up making him the mascot. 3 miles north of Hooper, Colorado, on a lonely 2-lane, through a whole lot of nothing, stands a 10-foot steel platform over a domed gift shop. It is called the UFO Watchtower, and it exists because ranching failed. Judy Messeline came to the San Luis Valley in 1995 to raise cattle. The high desert broke her operation. Joking that the valley needed a place to watch for UFOs, she built one, and it opened on Memorial Day in 2000. The valley already had the reputation to support it. By some counts, there have been on the order of 1,000 reported paranormal events here since 1992, and the legend goes back to September 1967, when a horse named Snippy was found dead near Alamosa, under what the papers called an unexplained mutilation. In 2021, the Watchtower acquired Snippy's skeleton. So the mutilated horse that helped launch the valley's whole UFO legend now stands re-articulated as a skeleton at the very roadside stop that legend built. Around 10,000 visitors came through in a recent summer. The sightings are still unproven. The horse is very real and it is on display. Above Nederland, on a high treeless ridge, there is almost nothing left of a town called Caribou. A few stone foundations, some mine remnants, the wind mostly. Caribou was born fast in the early 1870s during Colorado's silver boom to house miners working the Caribou mine. At its peak, it held around 3,000 people, a brewery, and 3 saloons. But it sat on a brutally exposed ridge, where the weather did most of the work of destroying it. Fire took much of the town in 1879. Owners bought and sold it over and over. Silver prices fell. And by the 1920s, fewer than 50 people were left. Here is the thing about most Colorado ghost towns. They were picked apart slowly by looters and souvenir hunters, board by board. Caribou is one of the few where that was almost beside the point. The wind and the winters scoured it down to the ground first, faster than any person could have. Stand up there now, in the constant wind and the near total silence otherwise, and you understand why nobody rebuilt. The mountain made its position clear. Every summer, scientists move into a dead silver town. The town is Gothic in Gunnison County, in a wildflower valley beneath the Elk Mountains near Crested Butte. Gothic was founded in 1879 for silver, like 100 other camps. When the silver collapsed, it emptied out, like 100 other camps. What happened next is the difference. In 1928, it was adopted as the home of the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory. The scientists call it Rumble, and the abandoned cabins became bunkhouses and labs. Nearly a century later, researchers from around the world work roughly 300 field sites around the town each summer. 3 of its more than 50 buildings still date back to 1879. A visitor center runs free tours, and the surrounding public land draws hikers and cyclists all season. So the ghost town reboots every June. The old cabins fill back up, just with field biologists and marmots instead of miners, and then empty out again into a long, snowbound quiet each winter. By the sound of it, the place is more alive now than it ever was back when it was actually supposed to be a town. 30 miles east of Missoula, Montana, at about 6,000 feet in the Garnet Range, more than 30 original buildings are still standing. For part of the year, the only way to reach any of them is on skis. Garnet came late to the rush. It boomed in the 1890s after gold turned up in the surrounding range. Not silver, like so many others. At its height, it had well over 1,000 people, 4 hotels, and 13 saloons. Then, the ore thinned and the people left. What makes Garnet exceptional is what they left in place. A dry climate, real remoteness, and the fact that nobody ever built anything new here preserved intact saloons, the J.K. Wells Hotel, the Davy Store, and miners' cabins with everyday objects still sitting inside them. Because it was so hard to reach, it was never stripped the way most ghost towns were. The Bureau of Land Management now stabilizes the buildings without modernizing them. Arrested decay, they call it, not restoration. So the place looks like it was abandoned yesterday rather than curated for tourists. The Bureau also rents out 2 rustic cabins overnight. And in winter, when snow closes the road and the only way in is by snowmobile or cross-country ski, you can rent one and sleep alone inside a genuine ghost town. Snowed in, creaking timber all around you with no one else for miles. Most people pay to get out of the wilderness before dark. Here, you pay to be locked inside it. At 11,200 feet in the San Juan Mountains, winter did not mess around. In 1884, the story goes, a blizzard buried the town of Animas Forks under as much as 25 feet of snow, and residents dug tunnels between the buildings just to move around. It was founded in 1873, where 3 rivers meet, about 12 miles northeast of Silverton, first under the name Three Forks of the Animas. It grew into a real community. By the late 1870s, it had a hotel, a saloon, a post office, a general store, a restaurant, and a sawmill, with close to 500 people at its peak. It is one of the highest ghost towns in Colorado, and that altitude was the whole problem. Summers powered a working mine. Winters were close to apocalyptic. The 25-foot figure is a story that gets retold more than it gets documented, so hold it a little loosely. But it captures the truth of a place built this high. When the ore economy shifted, nobody had a reason left to fight the snow, so they stopped fighting it. 9 original buildings still stand, including the 2-story William Duncan House, its bay window looking out over an empty alpine basin above the tree line. In summer, people grind up the rough 4x4 alpine loop from Silverton just to see it, and then they drive back down before the light goes. The view is the reason to visit. It was also the reason nobody could stay. One of the best preserved ghost towns in America is named after a romance novel. That is St. Elmo, tucked into Chalk Creek Canyon beneath Mount Princeton in Chaffee County, Colorado. It was founded in 1880 as Forest City. That name was already common in the area, so a founder reportedly renamed it after St. Elmo, a hugely popular sentimental novel of the day. The new name stuck, and the old one is mostly forgotten. the town boomed on ore. Around 2,000 people lived here at the peak, working more than 50 gold, silver, and lead mines. And in December 1880, the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad arrived and drove the commerce. Then, the mines played out, the rail line was abandoned, and the people followed it out of the canyon. What survived is a remarkably intact false front Main Street, now on the National Register of Historic Places, with a general store that still opens in season. Preservation runs through the State Historical Fund and a local nonprofit. There is a ghost story attached too. The Stark family ran the town's businesses to the bitter end, and their daughter, remembered in local lore as Dirty Annie, is said to still linger in the buildings. That part is folklore, not documented history, and worth keeping in that column. But it says something about this place that the last resident people still imagine here is the one who refused to leave. We opened this video with a town that skied itself off a mountain to escape. We will name it near the end, so tell us in the comments whether you would have made that run. If you are enjoying the deep dive so far, a thumbs up genuinely helps more people find these stories. Because from here, the tone shifts. The towns still ahead were not just abandoned. Some were drowned on purpose. One was sealed off by the government and left standing. For a brief moment in the 1880s, this silver camp was busier than Aspen. Then it lost, and Aspen became the name everyone knows instead. Ashcroft sits about 10 miles up Castle Creek Road from Aspen, in a high valley where the aspen groves blaze gold in the fall. In the spring of 1880, two prospectors named Charles Culver and W.F. Coxhead left Leadville, worked their way up the Castle Creek Valley, and founded a camp they called Castle Forks City. Within weeks, they had formed a miners' protective association, built a courthouse, and laid out streets. For a short window, the town genuinely rivaled its neighbor down the valley. The trouble was the ore ran shallow. The boom that started in 1880 had busted by 1883, and the miners drained downhill to Aspen's richer silver and milder climate. One town became a world-famous resort. The other became a quiet, beautiful ruin a few miles up the road. A plain case of what could have been. After the Second World War, a former 10th Mountain Division soldier named Stuart Mace built a lodge nearby and ran a dog sledding operation, quietly watching over the site. Several buildings survive: the Kinney Mercantile, a post office, a blacksmith shop, cabins, looked after now by the Aspen Historical Society, which runs summer tours on a $5 honor system. Two camps started even, 10 miles apart. One got the ski lifts. This one gets an honor box and a $5 bill. An entire Colorado town was condemned, emptied, burned, and then flooded on purpose. Its name was Dillon, and it sat in Summit County, where the Blue and Snake Rivers met 10 Mile Creek. This was not a slow ghost town fade. It was a deliberate erasure, and the reason was Denver's thirst. During the Great Depression, when residents could not pay their property taxes, the Denver Water Board quietly bought up much of the land and the water rights around them. By 1960, Dillon had 814 people and was the largest town in the county. In 1956, the remaining residents were told to sell and be gone by September 1961. If you wanted to keep your building, you paid to move it yourself. Some did. The community church, the town hall, the Arapahoe Cafe, and the 1883 schoolhouse were hauled off to the new town on the shore, or to Frisco, Silverthorne, and Breckenridge. Everything left behind was demolished or burned. Here is the detail that stops people cold. Before the water rose, crews exhumed and relocated 327 graves. The town moved its own dead uphill so that Denver could have a drink. The dam was finished in 1963. The valley filled, and the original site now lies under as much as 250 feet of water, with the flow crossing the Continental Divide to Denver through a 23-mile tunnel that took the better part of 2 decades to bore. A popular myth says whole buildings still sit down there intact. Local historians are clear that they do not. Everything was moved or burned first. Only foundations and roadbeds remain beneath the surface. People sail over it all summer, sailboat rigging clinking in the wind. Most of them with no idea they are passing above a valley that was cleared, grave by grave, before it went under. At 9,500 feet in the Absaroka Mountains of Wyoming, about 38 miles from the nearest small town, sits a mining camp that people left in a hurry and never came back to. Kirwin was ambitious for its altitude. In the 1890s, it sat at the heart of the Wood River Mining District with around 200 residents, and remarkably, for a camp that high and that remote, electricity and telephone lines. People called it a model mining camp. Then, on February 5, 1907, an avalanche that locals came to call the White Death of the Rockies came down on the town. It killed 3 people and buried buildings. That broke the town's will. Residents fled so fast they left the machinery where it stood. More than a century later, the steam hoists, the 3-story head frames, and the ore processing equipment are still in place, rusting in the valley, exactly where the work stopped. Then, the story adds a second vanishing. In the 1930s, the land became part of the Double D Guest Ranch, and among its visitors were Amelia Earhart and George Putnam. Earhart fell for the valley and had a cabin built for herself there. Construction was underway in 1937 when she flew out over the Pacific and disappeared. The cabin was never finished. Its foundation is still out there, a short hike from the old camp. Stone lines that stop exactly where her life did. 2 disappearances layered onto one place are why people started calling it cursed. You can only reach it by rough 4-wheel drive up a forest road, or on foot or horseback, deep in the Shoshone National Forest, ringed by 12,000-foot peaks. The Mititsa Museum runs a single tour up there each August. Most people never see it. By the sound of the wind and the groaning metal, the mountains seem to prefer it that way. Most mining camps were full of single men. Elkhorn, in the mountains of Jefferson County, Montana, was full of families. That is exactly what made its cemetery so hard to look at. Silver was found in the Elkhorn Mountains around 1870 by a Swiss immigrant named Peter Weiss, and the mine that followed, developed by a man named Anton Holter, eventually pulled more than $14 million of silver from the ground. But the town that grew around it was unusual, populated largely by the families of married European immigrants, with a school, a church, a hotel, stores, and saloons. At its peak, roughly 2,500 people lived here. Then came the winter of 1888 to 1889. Diphtheria reached the isolated town, days of travel from the nearest city. At the time, the disease killed about 1 in 5 of the people it infected, and it was deadliest to children. It moved through Elkhorn, and it filled the hillside cemetery. By one documented account, a single family lost 6 children and then the mother, all inside 1 week. When silver prices collapsed a few years later and the railroad pulled its service, the survivors drifted away. The post office finally closed in 1924. 2 ornate 1890s buildings, Fraternity Hall and Jillian Hall, still stand today as Montana's smallest state park. Fraternity Hall's 2-story facade is one of the most photographed ghost town buildings in the West. But the part that stays with you is up the hill, past the empty buildings. The cemetery is dense with small graves, many of them marked with carved stone lambs, the symbol people chose for a child. You can read a whole winter in that hillside. Nobody up there has to say a word. We opened this whole list with a town that tore itself apart to escape. This is that town. Independence sat at about 10,900 feet, 2 miles west of the pass that shares its name, and roughly 16 miles east of Aspen, up on bare alpine tundra near the Continental Divide. Gold was struck there on the 4th of July, 1879, which is how it earned the name. It grew fast. By 1882, it had around 1,500 people, more than 40 businesses, hotels, a bank, and its own newspaper, the Independence Miner. It died just as fast. The gold veins were shallow, and by 1883, production had crashed from about $190,000 down to roughly $2,000. Miners drained off to Aspen for better pay and a warmer valley. A stubborn few held on anyway. Then came the winter of 1899, one of the worst in Colorado's recorded history. Storm after storm cut the town off completely and the food ran out. So the last residents did something extraordinary. They tore the 10 and 12-foot siding planks off their own houses, cut them down into 75 pairs of skis, and got ready to leave the mountain together. And because this was the frontier, they made a game of it. They billed the whole escape as the Hunter Pass Tenderfoot Snowshoe Club race. The entry fee was 1 ham sandwich. They skied out. The town was gone for good by about 1912, and only scattered cabin ruins and a mill site remain, tended now by the Aspen Historical Society, reachable by the dramatic drive up Independence Pass in the months the road is open. They ate the sandwich, raced their own houses down the mountain, and left the snow to keep everything else. Picture a row of pastel houses on the edge of a 600-foot cliff. The windows are broken. Wind moves through the empty rooms and pushes at things nobody has touched in decades. In one garage, a car still sits exactly where it was parked. Down the slope, a hulking ore mill throws its shadow over neat, silent streets. And every so often, a window catches the light in a place where no one lives. Nothing moves but the wind. And you are seeing all of it from behind a locked gate because you are not allowed to go in. This is Gilman, on Battle Mountain in Eagle County, Colorado, about 8,950 feet up above the Eagle River. And it is not a town that slowly faded. It is a nearly intact 20th century town that the government forced everyone to leave. Gilman was founded in 1886 during the Colorado silver boom, right on that cliff above the river. It was first named Clinton after the prospector and judge who developed it. Over the next century, it became Colorado's premier lead and zinc center, built around the Eagle Mine. After 1912, the New Jersey Zinc Company bought up the entire town, a company town in the fullest sense, with a school, a hospital, even a clubhouse with a bowling alley. Over its working life, the district gave up more than 10 million tons of ore. That extraction is what killed it. A century of mining left behind roughly 8 million tons of waste and heavy metals, leaching toward the Eagle River and into the groundwater. In 1984, with the mine no longer profitable and the contamination no longer possible to ignore, the EPA effectively condemned the whole place. Families were ordered out quickly, and they left behind homes, cars, and furniture. In 1986, it was declared a Superfund site and placed on the National Priorities List. Around 235 acres, some 8 million tons of mine waste. When the pumps were switched off, the mine was allowed to flood. Here is what makes it so eerie. People left so fast that cars still sit in garages, and the mine's shaft elevators are locked at the top level, right where they stopped. An entire mid-1980s town, abandoned in place and then fenced off as too toxic to enter. Today, Gilman sits on private property, strictly off-limits. An active legacy contamination site with flooded shafts and real fall hazards. You can legally see it from one place only. Highway 24, down below, where it looks almost like a town simply waiting for its people to come home. Officials have put out warning after warning about trespassers who slip past the chained switchback gate, because break-ins keep happening. So do not go in. That refusal is the whole heart of it. Of every place on this list, this is the one you truly cannot walk through. A modern town poisoned by the very industry that built it, sealed shut, and left standing on its cliff for everyone to see and no one to enter. These 13 are not the only ones. The Rockies are full of towns that emptied out for reasons just as strange and did not make the cut. My own favorite here is Elkhorn. That hillside of stone lambs says more about a place than any plaque ever could. Which of these surprised you most? And which town near you did we miss? If these are the kinds of places you like to sit with, subscribe.